Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
Welcome back to the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Executive Director William Wolfe, and I'm joined today here in Washington, D.C. with a very special guest. I'm so honored to have him on the show. Former Congressman, former Southern Baptist pastor, and Ambassador at-large Designee for International Religious Freedom at the U.S. State Department, Mr. Mark Walker.
Thanks, William. It's great to be with you. Thanks for all your good work on the Hill. And now as the executive director there, we've been following you there a good while. So it's a privilege to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to sit down. So
Sure.
You, I think, are like, if I could grow a perfect guest for the show in a lab, it might be you.
Well, if I could grow a perfect beard, maybe it might be yours. How about that? So even knows.
Thank you. So, well, first of all, we're both from North Carolina.
Yes.
So we share that. And you were a Baptist pastor, a Southern Baptist pastor, before you ran for Congress.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your life story.
Sure. You know, I grew up, I'm the oldest of three boys. My father, to this day, he will be 80 years old next month. He's still a pastor at a Baptist church there in the central part of the state of North Carolina. Growing up in it, I was like, it wasn't like that we went crazy or rebelled or something after high school. I just didn't want any part of it. To see the constant 24 hours on call, the constant engagement that he had, dealing with everybody's issues all the time. I'm thinking, I'm just going to pursue something else. So I pursued business and finance, worked there for probably about 5 years out of school until the Lord began to work on my heart, my wife's heart, who happens to be, ironically enough, the oldest of three girls, whose father was a Baptist minister. He's deceased now. So they both come from the independent Baptist world. My dad went to Baptist Bible College. Her dad went to Tennessee Temple University there in Tennessee. So they come from a very conservative worldview, even among the denomination.
Sure.
That goes back some time. So I went back to school, got a theology degree. I cut my teeth with the wonderful Dr. Gary Chapman, wrote the 5 love languages there at Calvary Baptist Church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and went on to serve as a worship pastor, an executive pastor, and a senior pastor, but stepped away in 2013. In fact, December 31st, 2013 was my last day, and I ran for Congress in 2014 and had to get through 3 elections, goodness gracious, a primary, a runoff, and a general election, but we were grateful for that opportunity and certainly learned a lot.
Yeah, well, that's an incredible story. And so I think one of the things a lot of our listeners would be interested in hearing is what made you, somebody who didn't want to go into ministry initially, but then did and was in it for 16 years, change your mind and pursue the calling of being in politics?
Well, I will tell you this, and I don't know how many people would agree with this, but I was in Tampa in 2012 for the Republican National Convention. Somebody had given me a ticket. I wasn't a delegate, set up in the nosebleed sections, but during one of the breaks, I actually went down to the floor. And it was just like, it was the same kind of leading or guiding that I felt like that came from the Holy Spirit, stepping away from the ministry or from the business world to the ministry, that I just in that moment began to think, man, this is where I see my future. I didn't know what that looked like, whether I would, stay in ministry full time and serve in a local capacity. But my concern, or what was birthed out of a frustration, was the silence of the church, not engaging in the things that were probably cultural relevant. I'll put it this way. Go back 50 years ago, you had one nightly news program, 30 minutes long, reporting the facts for the most part. Well, since then, we've got 7 or 8 24-hour media outlets. Our social media is full of the news and the political. And for me, it just got to the place, how can I abstain from not engaging on things that were impacting my own children, whether through the education, whether the political system, and just being quiet about that. So through that process, God led me in my heart to step away completely from ministry. Took no salary in 2014 from any church, any ministry, and we ran for Congress and were able to have some success there, and took that passion to the Hill here to be able to try to be a voice for things that mattered in this particular conservative perspectives.
Well, that's great. And when you ran,
yes,
how did you downplay the fact that you were a Baptist pastor? Did you put that out front? How did you negotiate bringing the fact that you're you're a Christian, you're a Baptist, you're a pastor, and you want to represent these people in Congress.
Well, I didn't lead with it because I did not want to be one-dimensional. I wanted to show that there was a little bit of depth. It wasn't just that I was here to give a Sunday school lesson. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to be able to talk about that I had a command of the issues, specifically the policy aspect of it. In fact, when I got here, I was the first member of the freshman class to pass legislation, an anti-human trafficking bill. And at the end of my first term, I became the first, freshman to ever be elected to chair the largest caucus in Congress, the Republican Study Committee, which is a policy. Now, at the same time, I was the co-chair of the prayer caucus. When President Trump wanted some of the religious leaders to have dinner with me, I would get the phone call and go over to have dinner. In fact, I had a chance to share a little bit of the gospel with him one night there in the White House. So I didn't have to separate either one. And, in 2 Timothy 2:15, Paul talks, study to show yourself a workman, that you don't need to be ashamed. I think a lot of times Christians aren't informed. The church isn't informed. The world is informed. And that's why a lot of times they are beating us on these issues, because whether we're told not to engage there or whether we're just lazy at times, I think that's a huge mistake on our part. So I wanted to show really early on that we were informed on the issues to be able to come to Washington and lead on these concerns.
And so you came here for the start of your first term. It would have been January 2015.
Was sworn in January 2015. That's correct.
Okay. Yes. And so a lot going on then. Obviously, we have a presidential primary that year and then an election the next year. So welcome to D.C.
Yeah, real quick. Yes,
a lot going on. What what was most sort of surprising to you? Well, let's do good and bad. When you come up here, you've been a pastor. Now you're getting plugged into the swamp.
Well,
what really sort of was like, wow, this is how it works.
The first impression that I had was to be grateful for the education that I've received in ministry. There is no other education like that in the world, because you deal with people from all walks of life. The other thing is, sometimes the people that you invest or help the most are the ones that will bite you the hardest. Well, that's politics. So I felt like I almost had an advantage coming here, growing up in it, but also spending 16 and a half, almost 17 years in the ministry working on these things. So it was just a natural fit. People have asked me, said, how did you hit the ground running? I've said, well, if you can survive a Baptist businessman, you can go work anywhere, kind of tongue in cheek. But dealing with people on a daily basis, that's really what you do in ministry as well as politics. So I felt like it was a natural progression. I had to learn, all the procedures, when I reserve, when do I yield, all the different things. But I was ignorant a lot of the terminology, but I had a heart to know what I wanted to accomplish. And that's why we jumped straight from ministry instead of, working as a councilman or commissioner. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We just felt like that we wanted to make an impact on the national level, and God began to open up that door to do so.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story. And did you, and if you don't have any examples, no worries, but did you find early on anybody trying to co-opt you? And you had these moments where you had to say, no, I'm here for these principles. I'm here to serve Christ. I'm here for my constituents. I'm not going to go down that route.
It's not as black and white as that.
Okay.
But William, let me tell you, if you don't lay down some markers within the first 60, 90, I'll say even the first 3 or 4 months, you're not going to make it. As far as holding the line that you believe that you were called or sent to. It doesn't mean that there aren't good people that choose to kind of go more with the majority sometimes. But there are times where you have to draw a line in the sand. When I was in leadership and I still refused to vote for the omnibus, there are sometimes repercussions. 3 times I was passed over for the Ways and Means because my whip score count wasn't a high enough percentage. Those are things and decisions that you have to make. And the earlier you make those decisions, the earlier you stake your ground, to me, the better chance that you have of accomplishing something as opposed to just kind of following along. It doesn't mean that look, 90% of the things are things that we're agreeing, that we're fighting together on, and I have great relationships. I think a lot of some of the guys that are leading now, in fact, Speaker Johnson followed me as RSC chairman, and I helped pave the way for him to be the RSC chairman, and then the vice chair, the position that I held at one time as well. But there are going to be moments where you're in those chambers and you're looking up at that voting board and you see your last name Walker, and there's a blank there because you haven't put your voting card in either a green Y or red N, and you're seeing a lot of your friends or buddies vote a certain way, and you know that by putting that up there, there's going to be a challenge. I won't give the name, but I remember somebody another member from North Carolina, when I voted for the omnibus, came by and whispered in my ear and said, look, this one may have some ramifications or repercussions to it. I knew that and understood that. But to me, if you're able to survive because of all the pressures, and I'm not talking about it's black and white, hey, follow this seedy trail, or here's some money for your campaign. But there are things that so many good people come sometimes, and they just caught up in this rush or this torrent. And if you've not had the experience in your life to be able to make tough decisions, or if you've not been in an environment where you have to draw a line, it's very easy to get sucked down that vortex.
Yeah. And so what were some of the issues that you wanted to address when you came here? So now it's 2025. So it's been a decade since you first came here. And what were some of those issues that really animated you a decade ago? Right. And where are we now on those?
I think to me, something that we saw a huge concern was my first 2 years were President Obama's last 2 years. So the border situation was just, having done some mission work, understanding what happens in some of these countries, specifically in our southern border, the human trafficking, the drugs that were coming in, and a president that would turn a blind eye to that. So that was something important to me, because I wanted to show that you could be a starch conservative follower of Jesus Christ, be compassionate, but also understand why we have the laws that we do. People forget sometimes, William, that we take in more legal immigrants than any country in the world. In fact, 25% of the American citizens were born in another country. That is no other country matches that. But if we're going to continue to be that beacon of hope to eradicate diseases, for you and I to share the gospel of Jesus Christ in places across the world, we have to have a set of standards that allows us to do that economically and not create such a burden that it inhibits us from being able to do so. So the border was important to me. The second thing was what was something I thought was crucial was to get our spending under control. The last time that Congress voted and wrote and voted a balanced budget, I led that. I wrote it, co-wrote it, and also got it to the floor, negotiated with Speaker Ryan to have a vote on it. Now, at the time, we had 240 Republicans. I believe we had 139 Republicans that voted for it. But those were two big issues that we came to town. We got both of those things to the floor for a vote, but unfortunately, the time did not have enough Republican support to get it to, after 2016, to get it President Trump to sign into law.
Yeah. So, budget and the border.
Yes.
Two big Bs.
Two big Bs. Yes.
And there's still two major issues. It's fascinating on the border in particular. One of the things that I've seen is that so much of that crisis there really wasn't a matter of the fact that we needed new laws. It was just that we needed a president with the political will to enforce our laws as currently written. Yes. Apparently, border crossings are now down 90+% since Trump has retaken office.
No question. It's leadership. At the end of the day, we have plenty of laws. So sometimes if the administration or the executive branch isn't enforcing, Congress feels like, well, maybe we write it this way, and I understand that is trying to codify even an executive order at times. But you have to have an administrator, in this case, a commander in chief, because no law has changed since Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It's just the attitude and the approach of enforcing, giving our border patrol, giving ICE, giving them the full authority to execute what is already in the law, and having some good people that I've served with that are helping lead some of those on some of those issues, I think has been crucial as well.
So you're a Southern Baptist. You grew up independent Baptist.
That is correct.
You're Southern Baptist now.
My mama never got over that, but no, we're good. So, yes.
Well, I grew up Presbyterian. And now
okay, all right. I was a little closer then. So,
yeah. Although both my parents are Southern Baptists now. Well, they're not. Now my parents are Independent Baptists.
I understand. We're going different directions.
That's right. Yeah. So I think that. My take as, a younger man, and I've been to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I was here for 10 years in D.C. Right. And what really kind of set me on the trajectory I'm on now was watching how some major Southern Baptist leaders responded to Donald Trump's election, to even just his campaign. And I thought, man, they seem kind of out of step with where I think a lot of Southern Baptists are. Is this really the kind of best we have to offer? And also, Southern Baptists really prioritize things like religious liberty. It's part of one of our core distinctives, and we'll talk about that more in your work here shortly. But what sort of wisdom would you give to Southern Baptists today, pastors, lay members who want to be more involved politically, in this very pressing and sort of contentious political moment?
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to speaking a couple of times at the Southern Baptist Convention to different groups. But I've actually met one-on-one with some of the previous presidents of the Southern Baptist Convention, and we've gotten to the place where we both agree that we're battling evil, but then agreeing, well, whose fight is that? And I'm thinking, well, if the church, if the pastor, if you're agreeing with me that we're battling evil, excuse me, but who the heck, if I may say so, do you expect to lead that fight? Nothing. If you look at historically at our country, and though we have some good people that walk with the Lord that are serving in this town, Washington, D.C., historically, though, great movements never came out of your state capital or even Washington, D.C.
Well said.
It came from God's people, specifically led by pastors and churches that were willing to draw the line and said, we will not bend, we will not bow on this. We saw this in 2020 in our state. A couple of independent Baptist pastors took on our governor, Roy Cooper, and sued him and won, when Roy Cooper said, yes, you can go to Walmart or you can go to adult clubs, but you can't assemble in church more than 10 to 40 people, whatever it was at the time. Well, they sued and won. That's the kind of courage that we need for people willing to stand up. If you look at the ground that we've ceded in the last generation over important issues, I know this is kind of pretty strong. I put a lot of responsibility to pastors and churches unwilling to engage to the level that we needed them to the level that people wanted them to do so. Even their own congregations, this mindset that we were going to pacify the left has never worked. It makes me think back of George H.W. Bush when he tried to negotiate after he says no new taxes. He thought, well, if I just work with you, well, they turn on him in a heartbeat. There are certain things, specifically biblical standards, that we must hold the line. I'm not saying that a pastor has to get up there and endorse somebody every Sunday or talk about issues that aren't necessarily under the scope of some kind of biblical teaching. But for those that are, and there is plenty in our generation, be bold, be a light, and be vocal about it.
Yeah, you've seen at least I've seen over the last decade plus, really maybe 20 years, this idea that churches shouldn't be political, and with sort of the rise of what we could call maybe a seeker-sensitive church movement. This idea of wanting to appeal equally to the left and right. And so the church says, I'm not political. Well, then the devil says, okay, I will make gender political.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. I will make male and female political. You just told me you're not political, so I'm going to make Genesis 1:27 political. Checkmate, church. What are you going to do?
Yes. Yeah. Now it's your move.
That's right.
And a lot of them looked around and say, well, we serve in this community or we're in an urban area. Well, how much more so to be the light? If that's the point. And it's not mutually exclusive. You can be bold. You can still be compassionate. One of the things that God really allowed us to do is I have a heart for many minority communities that have been sometimes suppressed by government policies that have really done a lot of damage, primarily to the family as much as it is economically. Some of the school situations that we've seen as well. But I, from what I understand, I'm the only elected Republican in the country who's won the United Negro College Fund President's Award, that's given a commencement address at one of our HBCUs. In fact, helped launch the HBCU paid internship program. The reason I say that is because sometimes people will say, well, why do you go in these communities and talk about what you believe? Well, why wouldn't we? And I think that's where pastors and churches, as well as people that are elected office, need to really go in and not in a harsh, in a way that is, especially to those that they're reaching out to. But I think if you look at Jesus's model, the people, whether it was the prostitute, the woman at the well, there was always a heart of compassion. But to the political leaders who was sharing or promoting a false gospel, he did not mince words.
That's true.
When he came to calling them out for what they were.
Well, okay, so you would be a great guy to sort of run this by then, given your outreach to minority communities and your heart for them. Obviously, we've seen the rise of things like critical race theory and DEI, because our take over the American landscape, universities, corporations, and even in the church.
Yes.
And we've seen leaders really embracing it. I call it sort of an obsession over race that I think is unhelpful. And it's happening, I will say it's happening on the left and the right. And so what do you have to say that is the way that the church or conservatives make productive outreach to minority communities who I agree with you completely are being seriously damaged by government policies? Right. Is it by adopting things like CRT and DEI, or is there a better way?
No, it actually makes things worse by adopting those things.
Okay.
I was giving a speech in North Carolina, and my deputy chief of staff was coming from the airport, said, hey, you may want to just not show up today because there's a group of Black Lives Matters protesters that have infiltrated the building, and they're waiting for you to show up as well. They've gotten word you're speaking. I said, oh, I'm going to get there even faster then. So we got there, started giving the speech. I was anticipating, and they began to stand and scream. And so I just shut it down for a second and said, okay, you've got the floor. You ask me any question that you want. And they started firing questions left and right. We were happy to answer all those questions. And that's, as a representative, that was part of my job to do that. And then I began to wrap up. One of them, asked me what my staff looked like, and we were able to share lots of wonderful people there. And I said, but you know what? I said, I didn't hire them because they were Black. I hired them because they were the best. I just looked in more places. And I remember they sat down and didn't say a different word. But to force the fact that, hey, parade out this, if we got more females or more males or what Black males or what, all that kind of stuff. Well, to me, that can do more damage than actually good. Yes, have a diverse team, but do that because they were the best people. You went and looked and found good people, whether it's a pastor, whether it's ministers, or whether it's in political staff, whatever it is. But I think it's the left's slippery slope. If you start chasing this DEI stuff, and to me, you can even make a case that that's not biblical if you're not basing things on meritocracy. Right. And that's where I feel like the pastors have said, well, if we appease in this area, the community will appreciate it more. No, I got into it with Maxine Waters one time because we were standing up. I was negotiating between the House and Senate on the Farm Bill. And of course, I don't know if your audience, you would know this, 80% of the Farm Bill, only 20% of it is actually farm-related, 80% of it is benefits, SNAP, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, food stamps.
Correct. So I was pushing for able-bodied adults for 20 hours, something, education, volunteer work, whatever. And she was trying to make a case that was racist. And I told her, I said, Maxine, let's talk about this. I said, you do more damage by not helping people find their God-given talent, what they were created to accomplish. By putting them out there, to almost giving them a little bit of a nudge, as opposed to say, no, you don't have to do anything. We'll provide all the benefits you could ever need. That stymies the growth more than it enhances. And I think that's a message that pastors could be sharing.
Yeah, well, I agree. And I think that you're right. It only hurts things. It doesn't help things. And, as we've seen with the DEI conversation now, it's gotten so sort of toxic, even in the mainstream, that universities, corporations are pivoting away from it. The church, I think, will still have to fight that, but we'll keep working on that. With the sort of remainder of our time here, though, I want to just get your take on the position that you're going to be, Lord willing, filling here, right? So you've been appointed by Trump. You need to be confirmed by the Senate.
Correct.
To be the ambassador at large for international religious freedom at the Department of State. Tell us a little bit about that position.
Oh, I was excited. President Trump called back in April last month to say, look, I'd like for you to serve in this capacity. And we had met with him at Mar-a-Lago at 101 and had talked some. In fact, our conversation started last year when he had asked me to help from the RNC perspective, kind of organize faith communities and even some of the minority faith communities as well. So we said, of course, we were happy to serve. We're, I think, the seventh person that would have this position. An ambassador at large is unique because I had to study on it myself a little bit as far as the opportunities. It's a global ambassador position where any country that you go and land, you're speaking on behalf of the president under the president's authority. So to be able to go and talk about some of the persecution, you might have had a working knowledge of some of this stuff, but over the last 4 or 5 weeks since President Trump and I talked, the people that I'm meeting with, the information, and I was even ranking member on intelligence and counterterrorism for a Homeland Security committee, subcommittee there. So, but to do the deep dive, it is atrocious. The blasphemy laws that are scattered throughout Middle Eastern countries, the human slaughter in the sub-Saharan Africa, the eastern part of the Congo, the extremists that we're seeing. We know for data that Christians are the number one persecuted people group in the world.
Can you say that again? I wanted to ask you about that, but say that one more time.
Yeah, and the facts are, I mean, it's very clear that Christians, people that proclaim Jesus Christ, are the most persecuted people group in the world.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing in different places is just slaughter. A few months ago, you might have saw the story, 70 Christians were beheaded by Rwanda militants in the eastern Congo. Well, it doesn't make a lot of press outside of a few Christian periodicals or things. So part of our job, William, is to expose, and when we can, eradicate the best we can, where there sanctions. The two people I'm supposed to be advising on this is Secretary Rubio and President Trump, and we look forward to getting out there and it's kind of come full circle ministry in some ways. I was telling the kids the fact that we can go out there and advocate on behalf of even boys and girls that their only crime is they believe in the same Jesus that you and I do. So we're excited about that. As you stated, I do have to get through Senate confirmation. Mike Huckabee was reminding me of one of Job's friends the other day. He wasn't very encouraging when he told me how bad it was. No, just kidding, of course. But
he made it through.
Yeah, he did. So we're excited about that opportunity, and we'll try to make the most of it when we get there.
Yeah, I think, Lord willing, if and when you make it through, you will be maybe the 5th Senate confirmed Southern Baptist appointment in this administration. We've got Russ Vought at OMB, Scott Turner at HUD, Doug Collins at VA, Mike Huckabee over in Israel, and you. I might be missing some, but that's a good representation there.
Look, and even in the cabinet, President Trump, first of all, he cares about religious freedom. The reason we know that, he is the only president in the entire history of our country who to ever host a meeting at the United Nations on religious liberty.
Yes.
Only president to ever do that. But he is appointing people that walk with the Lord into very influential, important positions that are of a favor, of a high esteem. And in fact, I guess I can share this. My wife and I met with Susie Wiles for about an hour in South Florida a few months back, and she's told us, she said, President Trump has changed. She said, I know you worked with him a lot in leadership in his first term. She said, but Mark, after this assassination attempt, she said, not only is it changed, she said his faith has become real to him. And I'm not trying to advocate that, he still got that New York real estate tycoon language that he likes to use.
Sure.
But at the same time, I do believe there's been a heart change. I don't want to create a false pretense that's not. But by the mere fact that he is carving the path and creating space for believers, I'm not just talking about nominal Christianity. I'm talking about people that there's all evidence that they walk with the Lord to serve in leadership positions that are impactful, whether it's our country, even the entire world.
Yeah. Well, and when you say that, it's true. And we're just scratching the surface here, right? In terms of, we've got the White House Faith Office. We've got strong Christians. I know many at senior level positions at the State Department and across the government. And we've got these major issues: Christians persecuted globally, Christians persecuted here at home, and even Christian, you could call it sort of soft persecution of Christians in Europe, in a place that
freedom of speech is disappearing day and night.
Right. Freedom of speech, they're arresting people for praying silently outside of abortion clinics in Europe. So, that Christian light and heritage is fading there. There's so much work to do. And there was a strong and loud, well, I don't know how big they were, but there was a loud contingency of self-professed Christians, maybe the Christian left, whatever you want to call them, who were telling people like you and me, it would be better if Trump weren't elected. Yeah. I just can't buy into that. I don't know about you, but I can't buy that.
Well, I'll give you one example. So, and this is very partisan, but it's just what I'm being told. During the Biden administration, the gentleman that President Trump had in the religious liberty position just simply didn't engage. So even persecuted groups, whether they were Muslim or Jews or Christians, no engagement whatsoever. And so I don't know why you could make the case, and I've heard some of them say it as well, some of these so-called religious leaders, that we would be better off if Trump wasn't in office. I don't know how you make that leap logically to say that. Look, I'm not going to sit here and justify every decision President Trump's made in his life, or some of the stuff that he does on Twitter from time to time. But if you look at the sum of the whole of things, as far as the ground that believers can regain, or maybe even Hosea 10:12, breaking up new ground, right? We have an opportunity for 3.5 years to be uninhibited as far as getting out there and taking the message of Jesus Christ, not just to here in the country, but across the world. President Trump's meeting with these, and I've heard some of the criticism, as we touched about a little bit earlier, that creates space for us to be able to go. And there doesn't restrict us. It creates more space.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope to build on that, whether we've got missionaries, whether it's with the IMB or whoever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to go out there and advocate even more. But it is atrocious when I hear, I'm almost wanting to name some names here, as far as going out there and saying that I'm a never Trumper. I was more for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris
Mm-hmm.
than somebody who is literally putting Southern Baptists in these positions of leadership.
Right. And maybe one of our last questions here, just help our listeners understand why it's good and right for Trump to have such emphasis on Christian religious freedom. Now, of course, in your role as an ambassador at large for international religious freedom, you're going to be working on behalf of everybody's religious freedom around the world. But as you said, Christians are the most persecuted religious group globally. And if you do study on this issue, you realize that it's in countries where Christianity is really the predominant religion that real religious liberty happens. It's almost exclusively, right? It's the Christian faith really grounds a culture where there can be other religious expressions, tolerated, and places, particularly Muslim countries that don't have that, they don't tolerate any. So just, some people will say, well, we just need to focus on everybody equally, but tell us why it's so important that we need to look after Christians in this day and age.
Well, I mean, biblically, we know the enemy is walking to and fro, seeking whom he may devour. And for those that are followers of Jesus Christ, they are a specific target. The enemy doesn't want the gospel spread, and that's going to be something. That's not just something that we've seen in the last administration or two. That's since, if you know your biblical history, you've had emperors try to stamp it out. You've had governments try to eradicate it. Herod tried to kill Jesus as a young child. You name it. It's always been that way. The gospel is offensive because of in my opinion, as a believer, it is the truth of what we have for eternal life. And that's why I'm a follower of Jesus Christ myself. But there's always going to be a war against Christians. And we've seen that. As you said, in this position, my job is anywhere there's people of faith that's being targeted or persecuted, my job is to advocate, and I will do so. But it's very clear, as we talked about, that Christians are still the number one persecuted group in the world. And I look forward to being able to be the kind of voice that they need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, last question for our listeners. What advice would you give to Baptist pastors, Baptist politicians, lay members, maybe interested in getting involved in politics? Maybe what sort of virtue or disposition would you say is so needed for our day and age?
Three things come to my mind. Be informed, number one. You do not have the luxury of, as a pastor, not being informed, because your people, your parishioners, they're being inundated every single day, whether it's on the local level, state level, federal level. If you're not informed, we're basically handing over precious ground to the left, to the radicals. So be informed. Number two, be involved. Talk about these issues. That the strength, as if you're attending your church and when you hear your pastor back you up to get out there and be involved, to be engaged, it does wonders for encouraging, providing hope. And then the third thing is be in prayer. James 5:17, that's one of my favorite verses because it says the effectual prayer, the fervent prayer of a righteous man or the righteous avails or changes much. There were so many people praying for President Trump, so many people praying for this past election, to be able to allow their children and grandchildren to grow up to enjoy the same religious liberty that previous generations have. So be informed, be involved, and be in prayer.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Sure. My privilege. Thank you, William, for all the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Folks, thank you for tuning into this. Please do be in prayer for Mark Walker as he goes through the confirmation process. And, go ahead and maybe think about writing or calling your senator and saying, hey, let's get this guy through sooner rather than later. They could certainly use him at the State Department. President Trump could use him there. Secretary Rubio could use him there as soon as possible. Thank you for listening and have a good day.
The Center for Baptist Leadership podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed, the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.